Welcome to the Creating Your Conditions podcast, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, the conditions we create, and the conditions we have yet to achieve. My name is Ben. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am your host. You can find us at Creating Your Conditions on Instagram and on YouTube at the Venn diagram. In today's episode, I am interviewing Dr. Walter Solorzano, who is a board-certified internal medicine physician with a deep commitment to improving healthcare for underserved communities. A proud first-generation Salvadoran American, he was born and raised in the working-class, predominantly Latinx neighborhoods of Southeast Los Angeles County. And without further ado, I leave you with this episode. All right, Walter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you. As I was saying earlier, we'll have a documented conversation of ours on the internet.
That's a first. That's a first.
Cool. So let's go in. We'll do like a little check-in question to get us started.
Let's do it.
What's a weirdly specific life goal you have?
Yeah. I don't think this is necessarily weird, but I think it's a particularly important goal for me. I think growing up, I was always very physically active. You remember this. I used to play soccer pretty much every day back in high school.
Yeah, Walter was in a club team and our high school team.
That's right. So I played pretty much every day, had practice all the time. But then when I started undergrad, I think, and this is kind of a funny story, but I remember thinking in high school, I would have so much more time to study and to do work if I didn't have soccer. And, I think when I got to undergrad, that actually became a reality because, because of the demands of the academic kind of challenge, I pretty much stopped doing all physical activity. And, I was one of those. I gained a freshman 15. That happened to me. But ultimately, I stopped working out. I stopped, running. I stopped playing soccer. And I would try, since the end of high school, I would try to, come back in it. I would maybe be successful for like a month or two. But it was always really hard to sustain it. And so, we'll talk about the different stages of my life a little bit, but since graduating residency, which has just happened in June of 2024.
Congrats.
Thank you. It was huge moment. But after graduating residency, I said to myself, like, I really need to commit to getting back to being physically active. And so for the last 6 months, I'm taking it 1 week at a time. And, I've been working out pretty much for the last 6 months. And so, I think my goal is just to continue that. And, I try to take it 1 week at a time because every week has different challenges, different schedules, and I have to kind of work around the flexibility and the free time that I have and kind of get creative, sometimes getting up in the morning, sometimes, doing it really late at night. But regardless, I see patients I see patients almost every day, and I tell them,
as a doctor.
As a doctor, that's correct. And I tell them, hey, the goal is the recommendation, the national recommendation, and this is for everybody else that's listening.
Of course.
30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. And so, that's been my goal because I say that every day. I remind myself every day of it. And so it's been a huge goal of mine. And I've been, more or less successful with a few bad weeks. But the most important thing is I keep getting back on it. And so my goal is to take it 1 week at a time and, hit that 5 times a week. So not weird, but it is, something that I'm actually really, really proud of that.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
You got to practice what you prescribe, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's really hard. It's really hard to do that. I mean, When I tell patients that without, I we can talk about the challenges of being a primary care physician, but I only get like 10, 15 minutes per patient. And so, it's just like, hey, do this, and like, that's like, I know deep in my heart that's not going to work. But
Mm.
I at least try to put myself in their shoes and experience that, challenge myself. And so it's extremely challenging to do it 5 times a week, especially when you have, really busy, heavy schedule. So, um, my goal is to continue doing that and taking it 1 week at a time.
I love that.
Yeah.
Um, that's really hard, especially because I know soccer was such a big part of your identity, and
Yes.
it was something that I know brought you close to your dad too, because he showed up to all of your practices, or took you literally to all of your practices, all your games and stuff. Um, so there's a lot of history there, and for a period of your life, you weren't able to tend to it.
Yeah.
Have you been playing soccer in the last 6 months then?
Oh, Vin, you're opening up a can of worms there. Um, it's funny because I think during undergrad and even like med school, I would like pick it up, randomly, and I would play like pickup games and things like that. But there was a point that's, I mean, maybe like towards the middle of medical school, where I remember I just showed up randomly. It had been a couple months since I had played, and in my mind, I'm like, I know what to do, but my feet just couldn't do it anymore. Um, and so,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, no,
shoot.
it was gut wrenching. Like it was crushing when I realized that, I think if I committed to it and if I decided to go back, I think eventually I would, you know, regain some of the skills. But it'll just never be the same. And so I think, yeah, every time I played, I felt like emotionally like really distraught. I'm exaggerating a bit, but it was tough to kind of deal with. And so, and in addition to like the risk of injury, especially like not playing consistently, I kind of decided to put that to the side. And so right now I'm mostly focusing on like weightlifting and things like that. But yeah, no, it's playing soccer. Obviously, as you know, was extremely important to me, and um, I think I've had to. I haven't accepted that I've lost all my skills, basically, and it's kind of like this emotional fight that I have within me. Um, Maybe one day I'll pick it up and just see it as fun, but I think every time I try to play soccer, I'm like, I imagine myself being that 16-year-old, playing
Mm,
high school, and so it's hard to reckon, almost accept that those skills are gone. Yeah.
yeah, that's tough. Dang.
It's yeah, I have my moments. I'm like, it's not that serious.
But
But
it
kind of like,
really was for you, you know? Like, it was a big part of you being able to balance all the stuff you were doing was getting to put it out into soccer, right? Like,
yeah, and you bring up a excellent point, because like I said, in high school I used to think like, hey, um, what if I had this time that I put into soccer towards like studying and like reading and like trying to advance like my career. Um, and when I did experience that, in undergrad, and I wasn't being physically active, um, I realized the importance of having that kind of balance of like having something to, distract me and, help me. I think that's when I realized that soccer, just in general, probably just being physically active,
mm-hmm.
was also a big reason why I was able to succeed the way that I did in high school. And so, now more than ever, I realize the importance of being physically active and working out and things like that. So, yeah, it's it's kind of a touchy subject, but I'm proud of everything that I accomplished playing soccer growing up, and I think I'm just kind of using that same discipline that I had in soccer now into focusing on being consistent, working out, and things like that.
I
Yeah,
got you. It can
yeah,
take different, like, it can just look differently, you know? I actually haven't taken a dance class in like over a year.
that is crazy.
Yeah.
What? Yeah,
See, like, it's
yeah,
just sometimes we have to step away from different things to focus on others. And like, I've known Walter since we were in high school, and he's a specialist. Like, I'm more of a generalist, but he's like very, once he puts a target on something, that is what he's going to focus on. So if he can't be the best at soccer, he just might as well not play soccer.
I hate that that's true, but it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've been very focused on becoming a doctor, which is, not an easy like path. You kind of
Yeah.
have to put all of you into it. So,
It required everything. Yeah.
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 But I'm glad you are making that commitment for yourself now, and
Yeah.
telling your patients the things that you are also committed to doing
Yeah.
with your physical
Absolutely.
health.
And I think a part of me, thinks I have tried playing. For the record, I have tried playing soccer a few times, and I get hurt because I'm just not used to the movement anymore, and so I think that was a big part of the calculation as
Yeah.
well. It's like, oh, it's not, if I'm not gonna commit to it, regularly, it's probably not. It's probably for the best that I don't just do random pickup games, because then my competitive fire comes out, and then I hurt myself, pull a hamstring or something.
I get it. I got you. Wow, I didn't expect us to get
Suck.
into it emotionally on this first question.
I didn't either, honestly. I forgot that you have that, you know, you have that perspective on what it used to mean to me and what it means to me. And so, um, yeah, you brought up an element I wasn't expecting. Thank you for that. No, that's good.
Yeah. No, it was like half of our convo. It was like, no, can't hang out. Gotta
Yeah,
go practice, or I gotta go study.
it's true. It's true.
Uh, okay, let's start in like, where did you grow up, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. Um, well, it's funny because when all the autobiographies and biographies I have to write about myself and the personal statements
Because you're
and
so important now, Dr. Walter.
but I always kind of summarize it with Southeast LA County, and I specify that because people get really mad if you're not, if you're claiming like the wrong, or like you're claiming something that you're not, and I get that.
Southeast LA versus Southeast LA County. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you gotta be specific in these streets, and so. Uh, but I just say exactly where I was raised. It's I lived in Cudahy between 2000 no 1996 and 2004, and then I moved to Norwalk in 2004, and so I finished. I left Norwalk when I left for undergrad in 2011. So I claim both. I claim Cudahy and Norwalk, and I'm very very proud to represent both of those communities. Two extremely um, hardworking, primarily Latinx communities, and so I'm very, very proud of being from those two cities. Um, yeah, and I think through my education and through everything I've learned about studying communities and environments and resources, um, I, I have a lot to say, so you may have to be more specific with your questions.
Yeah.
But I think the general theme that I've learned to really appreciate, having that background. I think I always have, but it really hit me when I was gone and I was in North Carolina for undergrad, and people would ask me like, "Where are you from?" And I would say Los Angeles, and it gave me all the pride in the world to say that.
Like a badge of honor.
Yeah, big time, big time. And I think the initial like jerk reaction when somebody says they're from LA, they think, what's in the movies. And I was quick to point out that that wasn't my experience. I didn't even know what that was, growing up. And so, it was always like, no, well, I mostly grew up on the southeast side. And so a very different experience from what you probably think. But it gave me a lot of joy, a lot of pride. And, I remember being at Duke, and and volunteering at the local nonprofits and like working with the local communities of color. And this was maybe like my second or third year there, and I just remember thinking, this is awesome, and I love this work, but I got to go home. Like I got to go back to my community and work there. And so
Hmm.
that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to pick a direction to go.
I know
Um,
there's so many different routes to go. I think in terms of the way I think about my childhood and what's kind of set me up for the success that I have now. Um, Obviously I have a lot of pride of coming from these communities where I see a lot of hardworking people, a lot of people that don't have a lot of resources, but do the best they can with what they have, and I got a ton of respect for that. But in terms of what probably played the biggest role in me getting to the point that I am now, I would say it was really the home that I was in, and I think despite some of the chaos surrounding my home, um, my parents did an excellent job of creating a relatively stable environment. Um, but in addition to that, I think my dad in particular was the person that I remember going to practice. I would practice in like South Central Los Angeles, and we would drive like 30, 45 minutes out there because of LA traffic. And every time on the way to practice, he would be telling me about like things like, hey, like with hard work you can achieve anything. He'll tell me things like, there's no limit to what you can do. Um, and I was a little kid. I was like, this guy got to stop talking. He always says that, and it's kind of like tiring. But he would say it all the time, and it got to the point where I started believing him. And I didn't know what it would mean for me to be successful. I didn't know what that meant or what I had to do to be successful. But I think at the very core of what I've been able to accomplish has been that sense of belief, and just like my parents constantly telling me that I could do whatever I wanted. And so during all the difficult moments that I've experienced in my career, all the moments that you know have been tough and I've wanted to quit, I think I hear my dad in the back of my mind telling me that I could do it. And so that's probably the most important part of my childhood, I would say. It was always my parents' support and their example. It wasn't it, they showed me by example. They were financially, very responsible. I always had the basic things that a kid needs to succeed, right? Like things like food, water, housing. That was always there, and I can always count on that. But beyond that, they really focused on my mentality and the way I thought, and they did an excellent job. I mean, without that, I don't think I would be where I'm at right now. Yeah.
What do you think about like their upbringing, or what do you know about their backgrounds that made them think that way to instill it
Yeah,
into
I mean,
you?
I think my dad is a really smart man. All credit to him. But I think they grew up in probably the opposite of what they created for me. Um, they were they're both Salvadorian, and so they lived through the Civil War in the 80s. They tell me a little bit about the instability that they had growing up. Things like the army would come into their homes and like take like their siblings. They would come into the schools and like round up the boys, things like that. And there was like violence everywhere. There would be moments of like shootings right outside their homes, like extremely unstable. Um, and so, I think that's an excellent question that I had to explore some more with my parents, and just to kind of get at the root of why or how they made that conscious decision to create such a different environment for my brother and I. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think all credit to them. the things that I've accomplished in comparison to what they've done, to adapt to a new country, a country where they don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture, they don't understand how things work. I mean, if I think their successes are far more impressive than anything I've ever accomplished, and so all credit to them.
Yeah. I remember your dad always being pretty hard on you. It was like tough, really tough love.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
High expectations, but also just like very diligent with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because a lot of my friends that meet him now, they're like, he's really intense.
I remember one time I said something in Spanish to him, and then he was like, "Oh, so you speak Spanish now?" And I was like, oh, I can't go further than this one sentence. I should have never said anything. I felt so intimidated.
He was fucking with
That
me
was high
too.
school.
Yeah,
I know he was, but still.
but that's I think I I really gravitated to that intensity. I guess it really worked for me,
Yeah.
because I believed them. I sure as hell believed them. I was like, you know what, I can dream big, and that's where that kind of these goals, these crazy goals that I have sometimes, like that's the foundation of them.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
when they both show up for you all the time, like in high
yeah,
school, like it's one thing for him to lecture you about soccer, but he is still driving you an hour each way sometimes to get you to soccer, you know?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
he'll never miss a game, and my mom too. I mean, yeah, they did an excellent job, and I feel like I gotta tell them a little bit more about that.
Mm.
I try, but it's hard. It's hard. Yeah,
Time is enough, I think.
yeah,
Sometimes the communication is hard to get to know our parents' histories if
yeah.
it was really hard, and, I know it was for them. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see. Do you
Yeah.
remember a strong characteristic of yourself as a child?
Well, then maybe you can answer this question for me. I'm just kidding. I think
Annoyingly disciplined?
I don't know about unknowingly, but
Well, it's not that different from now where I'm like, I don't hear from Walter for a while because he's like in school again.
I'm
And
still
then,
a little.
yeah, or like our hangouts were like, oh, you can come over after I study, and then I need to study after you hang out. And then like his mom would give us food, and I'd be really grateful. And then he'd be like, okay, yeah, you got to go now because I got to study. I'm like, fine, I'm leaving. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I think it is. That's
I'm just
probably the
kidding.
most important quality I've always kind of had. I've I and even when I have nothing else left to give, I just like I really give myself 100% to the things that I want to accomplish. And so um, sometimes I think a little bit too big, and I try to do too much. But yeah, I think ultimately is that discipline that even if I don't achieve the outcome, I know that I gave it my 100%, and that means having that discipline and working as hard as I possibly could. And so yeah, that's probably right. I think a lot of my close friends probably feel that way too, even now. So.
Now it's on a podcast and it's official on the web.
That's
No, but it's also a trait I like greatly admire about you. I think that goes back to that specialist generalist thing. Some people are better at kind of spreading over like a couple things and being pretty good, but you've always been the type to be like very excellent at the thing you focus on. And you feel secure enough in our friendship that, you know, I'm not gonna be like, what the fuck, Walter? Like, why aren't you hanging out with me? Like it's
yeah,
fine. I know you're doing your thing and you support me from afar.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've always been that way. So at least there's some consistency, huh?
Consistently, annoyingly disciplined. Got it. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe let's move to college a little bit.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah,
the fun stuff.
the
Yeah.
fun stuff. So,
Um,
where did you go to school? And you kind of mentioned a little bit about how you like volunteered. Um, Actually, before we answer that, like you're a doctor now, but you kind of always known you wanted to be a doctor. So, what was your thought process in applying for schools and that path to that first step to becoming a doctor in pre med and stuff?
yeah. Well, I didn't always know. Um, I think I the first time that I like felt felt that that was the right route for me was probably my senior year. Um, I think, and
Of college?
no, of high school.
Oh.
Well, I guess you know what I mean. It wasn't like I came out the womb like I'm gonna be a doctor.
Well, now I don't think anybody comes out the womb wanting to be a doctor.
Some people are. You know? Yeah, they're like, I want to do this. Just grab the stethoscope and try to listen to the hearts.
I got my coat on already. But
um,
all jokes aside, 17 is still pretty young to like
fair enough. Yeah,
get that feeling, you know.
fair enough. Fair enough. I think at least, a 16, 17-year-old, um, when I was thinking about what career I wanted to pursue, I think, obviously becoming a doctor has like this kind of, this like respect that the community gives to this position. And I think that was, attractive to me. But I think the one thing that really that I really gravitated towards was, it felt like my morals and the things I believe in, I wouldn't have to jeopardize that doing my job. And so, it
Hmm.
felt like my role was going to be to help people, and whether that's true or not, um, I think ultimately, um, that was probably the most um, attractive part of wanting to pursue that profession, because I felt like I wouldn't have to jeopardize my morals and my views. Um, I think ultimately of wanting to do the right thing for other people, and from an early age, that really felt right. And
Were
so,
were there other roles or jobs that you saw and thought like that might compromise who I am? Like what?
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone makes sense of their life the way that it makes sense to them. I just felt like medicine would give me the opportunity, to never really have to jeopardize that. Um, we can talk about why that's, I realized that wasn't necessarily the, you know, correct. But that's what made the most sense to me as a
Yeah,
16
at the
cent.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of laid the foundation of like, hey, I think it'd be awesome to be a doctor. Um, Little did I know that the route was extremely long and challenging. But I think that saying of ignorance is bliss. I really believe that because I had no idea what I was getting myself into, um, and I was figuring things out as I went. I didn't know. I mean, things like the SAT, right? Like we hear about that. We heard about that pretty late into high school, and it turns out we got to take this test. Um, And it's funny that you ask about like college and the transition from high school to college. But I remember being in high school and thinking like, yeah, I'll probably go to like, maybe like a UCLA or like a UC Berkeley, and I would have been perfectly happy with that. Um, but when I was thinking about it, I was like, why can't I apply to these schools that I have no idea where they're at, um, or what they're about? But let me just go for some of these like huge names. Like why not me?
Hmm.
And I I remember having to, or I asked, one of our counselors, and I won't name any names, but they were like, because I asked them like, how do I apply to like Harvard or like like Duke or like Brown, and They were like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I was like, okay, cool. So I'll figure it out by myself, you
And
know? And
that
so,
says a lot about like the counselors and their capabilities in our high school, right? Like the resources, because you just mentioned we didn't even know about SATs, let
yeah,
alone our counselors knowing how to help us apply to these other bigger schools, right?
yeah.
That says a lot about the resources we had. Like obviously no
Absolutely.
shade to them. It's just they had never had a student ask for that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And
Yeah.
I think, we can talk all day about, how we're all kind of victims of our environments. But,
Mm.
um, I think, yeah, that was an example of like something in my environment that was kind of impeding me, a barrier where a lot of the kids that I ended up going to college with, they never had to deal with that. Their routes were pretty much laid out for them. But I researched. I went on Google, I think it was, and I was like, how do I apply to these private schools in the East Coast? And I ran into this thing called the Common App, and I was like, let's do it. And yeah, I just went for it. I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but why not? Like, why not me? And when I got into Duke, and it turns out they had knee blind financial aid, which for those that don't know, that just means that if you get into these schools that offer knee blind financial aid, they'll pay for whatever you need to be able to go to these schools. And so in my case, since my parents were considered low income, um, I basically got everything paid for. And so Duke paid for my tuition. They even paid for my housing. Um, and so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so that's how I kind of, you know, landed at Duke. It was a little bit by chance, but also like, hey, I probably could have just stopped there and been like, hey, my counselors don't know. I'm just gonna call it a day. But no, I was like, why not? Like, why not go for it? We'll see what happens. And that's kind of how I ended up at Duke.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it was wild. And it's funny because I wanted to go to Berkeley. That was kind of my top school. Um, but the opportunity of a lifetime kind of came around, and I wasn't going to say no to that. And I'm really thankful I did. Honestly, um, it was a great experience on so many levels. Really tough one, but it was nice to step outside of the bubble here in Los Angeles, and get a taste of what life is like outside of California. Um, and so I learned a lot. Um, Learned how to wash my own clothes.
One of those boys in the household, I see.
It's true. It's true. But it was, the world really opened up for me after that. I wasn't afraid to go on trips by myself. I studied abroad in Madrid for a summer. I did a lot of really cool stuff during undergrad, and I'm very thankful.
Yeah. I don't know, what made like Duke what was it about it that like made you more sure of your path in like becoming a doctor?
Well, becoming a
Or
doctor,
or what made it more unsure?
that's an excellent question. Well, I thought you were going to ask why I chose Duke, and I was going to be like, well, because
Why wouldn't you choose Duke if they're giving you like
it's fair. It's
yeah,
fair.
you know,
But I
everything.
think, it's kind of a funny story because I I didn't have money to apply to many schools, and I think there was this like financial aid package that they gave, and you could apply to a few, but I didn't know about it. Um, and so I ended up paying out of pocket for those applications, even though I could have gotten financial aid
I didn't
for
know
that.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that either until after.
What?
But basically, I limited to three schools.
Wait, I we applied for stuff together. I got that four apps thing for UCs.
Yeah, the UCs I got it, but for the
Yeah.
Common App, they also had.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the common apps.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
apply for anything outside of UCs.
Okay.
Gotcha.
um, so yeah, so I limited to three schools. I was crazy, so I was like, I'm gonna go for Harvard, and which was Brown, just because I heard they had a good like science and math department or something like that. And then I was down my third school, and I was like, which one should I do? This is gonna be my last one. And I was between Dartmouth and Duke, and one of my friends from high school, her cousin was at Duke, and and then I had also just seen Duke win the national championship, the basketball national championship,
Basketball,
and
NCAA.
they had Coach K, so Duke was the last school I decided to apply to, which is crazy. Uh, but I mean, I would say a big reason was definitely the basketball. So that was important. um, but in terms of how it solidified my decision to pursue the field of medicine, um, it's funny. It's maybe funny is not the right word, but it's like my first year went relatively okay, and you notice a lot of interesting things, right? And so coming out of Glenn, our high school, um, I was taking all the classes, the AP classes, all the honors classes that were available to us. Um, but then I walk into Duke, and the the lowest kind of math class that they offered was calculus. Um, and then the lowest kind of chemistry class was this like introductory chemistry class. And so I walk into Duke, and I'm taking these introductory chemistry and calculus classes, and it was wild to be in there because it was all students of color. It was all black and brown at like the lowest classes, right?
Hmm.
Because everyone else at Duke had already taken AP Calc, I don't know, BC or and AP Chemistry. And so they walked into like organic chemistry like right off the bat, or like these advanced like math courses. And so it was kind of glaring to see that disparity, right? Like I knew Duke wasn't, there wasn't primarily black and brown students; it was primarily white. Um, and I walk into these classes, and it's all just black and brown, and I was like,
Hmm.
I mean, it just shows the disparities and the differences in resources and
Across the country.
cross country. Yeah,
Because all those students are like picked off from like random places, like one
yeah,
kid from here, one kid from there. And
yeah.
coincidentally, only
Coincidentally,
only the black and brown kids are in that those
yep,
intro classes.
yep, yep. And
Mm.
so that's how my experience started at Duke. It was, and I felt comfortable. I was like, all right, cool. Like these are my people. Um, and I did relatively well that first year, and then second year, I finally catch up to the um, let's just call them the slightly more privileged students. And I walk into these higher level courses, and I get smacked. Absolutely smacked, because I didn't. It's like at Glenn. It felt like a lot of times like I was putting in the work, but a lot of it was like memorization. I wasn't like necessarily trying to understand concepts. I didn't know how to study. Is I guess what I'm saying. And so I didn't realize that until my second year at Duke, when I got absolutely smacked in like organic chemistry and physics and the tough courses. And in the middle of this kind of, I was having a really tough time. Obviously, this is the first time I'm like, not doing well academically, and so I think this was the point where this is usually where a lot of pre meds, in places like Duke and the UCLA's of the world, like this is where you kind of have to make a decision. And for me, I really had to look inward and ask myself, like, is this really what I want? And
Mm.
I took that summer to kind of think about it. I went to like Spain, and then I went to Honduras, and um, did some studied out there, and did some like it was like a health education trip that we were doing in this rural part of Honduras, and um, that was kind of where I said to myself, like, I'm either all in or I'm all out, because like this is going to be really hard. and I'm probably gonna keep failing. Not fail. I didn't like fail, but to me, I failed. Um,
You probably got a B.
no, I got 3 C's in undergrad. Uh,
Ooh.
yeah, yeah, and to all those pre meds out there, you know what that means. Like it's like you're probably not gonna get into
Mm.
med school. Um, and so I was like, hey, like I'm either all in or I'm all out, and that's when I really had to like figure out like why I was doing it. And it wasn't just because doctors are respected or you know it couldn't be that. That wasn't enough to get me through what I had to get through. And so that's when I started really connecting it back to my roots and realizing that I didn't see that many brown doctors growing up in a primarily Latino community. Um, and so in my mind I was like, I have a really unique opportunity here, to use the privileges that I'm getting now through education, and to maybe one day go back to my communities and be the doctor that I didn't have. And that's when my mindset really changed, and I understood the root of why I wanted to do it, and ultimately came back to Duke with a different attitude, and still feeling scared and not confident that I was going to get into med school. um, but I knew why I was doing it, and so that's ultimately, that was really important, because I was like, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to make this happen somehow, some way, and yeah. So yeah, I think in that way, like Duke was instrumental to getting me to med school because and that's when I had to reckon with a lot of other things, things like asking for help and being okay with asking for help. Um, And so third year of Duke, I'm like, all right, like I'm gonna figure this out somehow, some way. And I had to make a lot of changes. But most importantly, though, I understood why I was doing it, and that made all the difference.
You thought you knew why you were doing it when you applied and got to school there, and then you realize, oh, this can't just be for me, right? Like this
This
just can't
isn't
be for my status.
Yeah, it can't be. It's not
Mhm.
enough. I mean, it's not gonna get you through. And
It's not enough.
I'm sure you've seen that, then, or maybe you don't experience this as much, but schools are pretty savage. In terms of for pre-meds, there's so many pre-meds coming in, and they make these introductory courses 3 times harder on purpose because they want to make their med school graduation acceptance rates like as best as possible, right? And so they basically try to weed out the students that don't are not really about it, and are not really committed, and they do an excellent job at like weeding people out. But I was like, no, I'm in this. I'm doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about how you wanted to go back and like serve your community to kind of be a doctor that you would have liked to have, right? Like to see
Yeah.
yourself in a doctor. You also mentioned earlier that you were volunteering at a nonprofit, and that also made you think about going back to LA. Like, was there at a point, maybe your freshman or any point like in college where you're like, I'm not gonna go back yet, stay in the East Coast, figure that out, or
No, I
you
was
always
always like,
knew?
I'm going
Okay.
home. Hey,
Yeah.
yeah, I miss my family. I miss the community. Um, and I just felt very passionate that, you know, I, I wanted to, I wanted to put in this work, but I wanted to do it in the community that I came from. And so that was an equally important part of my why. Right. And so
Mm.
to me, and this can change, this can evolve, but to me, it just made the most sense to pursue this career in this community. And so that was also part of the dream. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. So after Duke, what did you do next?
Oh, well, I actually went back to Glenn, to our high school, and I tutored. I was like an avid tutor for a couple months while I was applying to med school. And I took the MCAT, which is like the SAT version of for med school. Another really difficult exam. Um, and then I got into Keck. I got into USC in December 8th, 2016. That was, one of the happiest days of my life. I was like, yeah, I remember I was at Glenn, like, in the middle of like some tutoring thing, and I got the email like congrats, and I was like, yo, this is crazy. Um, it was all that work that I had put in, and all those moments of like feeling like I wasn't gonna make it. It felt really, really good. Um, you know, the obviously after that, it's like the cost of going to USC was ridiculous, and um, but I was really excited to be able to stay home, and I actually got a few interviews on the East Coast, but I once I got into USC, I was like, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving USC. I'm staying home, and then I started med school, and med school was a trip as well. Uh, yeah, I mean, I
Eight
think,
years of your life,
yeah, I mean,
residency included, right? Like,
residency was so 7. Well, actually, yeah, you're right because I did a master of public health,
okay.
so it was 8 years total. But yeah, I mean,
Oof.
med school taught me a lot. It was really challenging. I think the first 2 years were very much like undergrad, where you're just studying for a test. You take the test, whatever, you pass it. Um, but then when you start going into patient care, clinical care, that's when things get really challenging. Because now you honestly feel like you're under the authority of another, like, resident that's like around the same age as you, and they tell you when you show up, they tell you when you leave, they tell you what to do. It was really weird. I mean, this whole process of medical training is a strange one. But I think ultimately it takes so much out of you. You're putting in so many hours of work. I think as a resident, the limit is supposed to be 80 hours a week, but definitely passed that a few times. And it used to be worse.
And 80 hours is already a lot.
Yeah, it was a ridiculous amount. But yeah, no, I'm happy to go into the unique struggles of this clinical training, but there's a lot to say there, I think.
Be a whole
Yeah,
other episode.
yeah, that would be a whole nother episode for sure.
What kept you motivated? What kept you on the path in that time? Because that's a long 8 years of your life.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
who
yeah.
was who was there for you?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, certainly, my partner played a huge role in kind of supporting me emotionally. Um, but I think, kind of like I mentioned, like I understood my why, and I figured that out um, at at Duke, and I just kind of constantly went back to that why, no matter what happened to me. And I was at the county hospital of Los Angeles, the biggest county hospital in med school, and so all I saw was black and brown patients, primarily brown, honestly. And so I was using Spanish every day. Um, and these patients, I mean, some of these patients grew up like in the same streets as me, and it just meant the world to me to be there, and like be able to like provide care in their language, with some understanding of their cultural kind of customs and traditions, and even like body language, right? Like things that you
Mm.
don't ever think about. Like I catch on to like body language that a lot of my peers don't, because that's how I grew up, right? And so I can see when a patient is turned off by something that I ask, and I have to like pivot. Like those are the things that I think those are the skills, the unwritten skills, the soft skills that I have um, that we need in those environments to be able to provide culturally competent care. Um, yeah, but yeah, I think ultimately, it's it constantly goes back to my why, and I'm reminded of my why every single day. Yeah.
Dang. Dang. Ah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of putting your head down and like your blinders on too, to focus
yeah,
on patients and the work all the time.
yeah. I mean, it's like I think back to like these tests that we have. I mean, I've had so many tests, but I just passed, the biggest test of them all, right? The last test to be like board certified, and I'm able to practice on my own now. I don't need to check in with anybody, and it was a great feeling to finally, be done. I think it was MCAT step one, step two, and then another step two, then a step three, and then the board exam. So 6 exams total. No, 7 exams total over like a 8 year stretch, I think. It
Mm-hmm.
was, yeah, yeah. And,
Ooh,
these are not walk in the park exams. One of them is 2 days. It's crazy.
dang.
Yeah,
Dang. Yeah, see, just like in high school. Nope, gotta study. I'll see you later.
I had to. I had to.
No,
I had to.
no, I get it. Um, Kind of leads us to now. So, what's I don't know, what's next for you? And like, what are you trying to focus on now?
Yeah. Well, I alluded to being able to work out the last 6 months. I think part of that is because I have a lot more control of my schedule now. Now that residency's over, um, I'm kind of setting the terms for myself now. I'm doing what I want, which is a great feeling. I mean, to have that kind of autonomy. Um, and I'm currently doing a fellowship. It's a health services research fellowship. It's called the
Because he
National
couldn't
Clinician
stay
Scholar.
out of school. Sorry, you can say it again.
It's called before I was rudely interrupted. It's called National Clinician Scholars Program. It's a health services research fellowship. Um, it takes like uh, young doctors and nurses and kind of trains them in health services research methodology, like how to make good study designs and like publish papers and things like that. But in addition to that, it's a really strong network of healthcare leaders like nationally. And so the last 6 months, I've talked to people that are leading, the county department, the health county departments here in LA. I've talked to people from, the Center of Medicaid and Medicare Services, which is like the national organization in charge of like the public health insurance. I've gone to DC, met with like health policy leaders. I've met with a bunch of like CEOs and people in the C-suite of like these large healthcare corporations, health insurances, things like that. Um, and so I'm getting exposed and learning about, you know, not so much the patient care side of it, and more so about the internal workings of our healthcare system. And so, it's exciting. It's really exciting to be around these like these people, these really motivated, driven people. And the more I think about it, obviously I love patient care, and that's going to be an integral part of my career. Um, but I'm also definitely considering, taking on some type of leadership role in some healthcare setting as well. And so, I think of like federally qualified health centers where, these kind of community health centers are in charge of caring for the most underserved of the communities with the least amount of resources. And that's kind of where I see myself in the future, taking on some type of leadership role, being in charge of how we deliver care, how we improve care for these communities. Um, I think I have a lot of routes. There's so many doors that are open currently. Um, and I'm kind of just taking it all in with the fellowship. I finished the fellowship in 2026, June 2026. And so finally at that point, I'll have my first adult contract. I'll get my first adult paycheck, and I'm really excited about that too. but it'll be like my first like official career move. Um, so yeah, I think the world is pretty open for me, and I'm really excited about what's coming. I think I'm still figuring out exactly what that's going to look like, but I'm open to it, and I'm excited to get started.
Choice is a incredible privilege, you know.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
It's
you
like
have been working towards you have been in your career.
fair enough. But I guess I mean like I'll finally be financially compensated appropriately
Mm,
for what I work for, and I think that'll come in like in June in 2026.
okay,
Yeah.
got you.
I think one of the things that I think about a lot, and my dad always says is, I mean, my dad is a really smart, wise person, and he's always like, you want to work hard so that you're able to be where you want to be, and not where life puts you. Um, and I think right now I'm kind of reaping the rewards of my labor for the past decade or so, and I'm very much setting the terms of what I do when I do it, and I decide if I don't want to do something, I don't do it. I'll give you an example. I don't want to work on the weekends anymore. I don't want to work night shifts, so I'm not going to do. And it's because I can. Yeah.
I respect it. Respect it.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I think this is my last question. Good place for us to end, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, share a message you would give to your younger self. How old is the younger self you're addressing, and what's the message?
Oh. Yeah. I mean, I I think the one of my most vulnerable points was when I was figuring out my why at Duke. I think I was so afraid. Throughout high school, I felt like I was very much a perfectionist, and I wanted to at least maybe not, a perfectionist, and I wanted to be seen as someone that was, perfect. And I think I realized at Duke that that's not only is not it's not only is it impossible, it's also very damaging. Um,
Mm,
and so I think I would tell my young Duke self that um, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to feel uncomfortable the first time that you're doing something. Um, it's okay to lean into discomfort because that's growth, right? Like every time you feel uncomfortable about doing something, you're learning something. You're learning a new skill. You're learning how to be in an environment. And I think not being afraid of making mistakes in front of other people, and just kind of embracing that kind of growth mindset would have been really helpful.
mm.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good message. It's also older than other people that I've asked this question to. Sometimes it's like 10 or a teenage self. And yours is more of a
Yeah.
adult version of you, but is also like early adulthood still.
Yeah.
Hmm, that's a good one.
Yeah. I think so.
Of course you do. Uh, thanks so much, Walter, for being on the podcast,
Yeah.
sharing so much about your perspective, your why, like how important it is to nurture your why. Because
Yeah.
if you're gonna work towards something, it might as well be very worth it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on here. Then I got a lot of respect for the the work that you do, and the creative side of you. And so, I think it's important to continue nurturing that part too. So keep doing what you're doing. Every time that you do it, it's a rep. You're gonna keep getting better at it. You keep, and so keep expressing yourself in that way. I got a lot of admiration for that too.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks, friend.
absolutely.
Appreciate you.
All right. I should probably